All right, so here's our focus topic. Again, it's this broad statement of risk management and income and revenue protection in the dairy sector. And this is an issue that has some interesting history and legs because for many, many decades, dairy did not have anything of this nature. Dairy was not a traditional row crop, obviously, that got in line at the beginning of USDA's risk management programs in the sort of the 20th century, bringing about various crop insurance vehicles and other types of price and revenue hedging vehicles. So dairy was always pretty much the odd man out as far as these types of traditional, certainly crop insurance, but and other things. And dairy would, be left either with nothing or some type of series of ad hoc sort of rescue efforts, so to speak, one-time appropriations. Frankly, that second part about the one-time appropriations hasn't changed all that much. That still goes on, which, as we will see today. But now there are at least a few regular instruments or regular programs that are available, and we'll go over those. And here's a little agenda we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about private risk management or private contracts in the nature of price hedging. That's sort of a topic all into itself that we could do at another time. Perhaps bring in someone who's in that business and really knows that. But we'll talk about the essentially the USDA risk management and other USDA income protection and protection programs for dairy. Now, here's a list of what we're going to talk about here today. Some of these are one-timers and very short-lived, and one of them actually I just saw in preparation for this has actually closed entirely and is done. That's the dairy donation program. But you hear a lot of these terms, and it's really easy to get lost in the shuffle and not really be able to distinguish between them. And of course, the terminology sometimes gets very confusing because it's very similar to something else that either once existed. And so these are and particularly the first three that you see here are the equivalent, let's just say, of some type of traditional program that you participate in that responds to the markets and provides you with some type of revenue based upon changes in market conditions on an ongoing basis in one form or another. Now, they're not all administered by USDA's risk management agency, the RMA. And FSA is the primary handler of some of those, or the primary administrator of some of those, and we'll go over those when we do that. Then 4 through 8 here on this list are more in the nature of either one-time appropriations that, as I said, those kind of things still go on in dairy, or there's some type of a sort of niche program that just deals with a very specific thing, such as dairy donations, let's just say. And so we'll go over those, and you'll see, of course, we did not plan it this way, but many of the things that we're going to discuss here today are exactly what Chloe was discussing because they had major developments in those programs within this last quarter. Again, we did not plan any of this to line up that way, but I am going to be talking about many of the same things that Chloe just talked about because it just kind of fell that way. There's a lot of these sort of one-time ad hoc programs that are going on right now in dairy. And, you can sort of look at the big picture and step back. And, that has a lot to do with lots of appropriated funding and other funding, allocated funding that USDA has at its disposal. I think it certainly has something to do with Secretary Vilsack's background and, his intimate involvement in the, Dairy Export Council as essentially his constituents for the, the years that since his two stints, so to speak, as USDA secretary. So there's a lot of forces that sort of are coalescing, is that the right word for it, converging here that are producing a fair number of these sort of ad hoc programs that are based upon a budgetary appropriation that when it's gone, the program will be gone. And, we know that COVID was full of those kinds of things, and we still have lots of the legacy of that going on at USDA. All right. Let's talk about the major instrument, the major program. This is the kingpin of dairy risk management tools right now. And it has, it's relatively new, but it has just exploded and taken off and become the leader almost right out of the box. Had a little bit of a interesting beginning, which we can look at, but this is it. Dairy margin coverage, the DMC program, has supplanted all other dairy risk management programs. So anything else by different terminology, margin protection program, MPP, that's gone. This is in some ways the replacement for that, and you can get very confused looking at USDA's website too, because many of the former programs that don't exist anymore are still documented there, and you got to look very closely at the dates. This is the program. This is the leading #1 program in the country today for dairy, and probably will be for quite a number of years. And of course, these things are the product of many, many minds working together to always refine what works best for dairy, which has so many different moving parts than, row crops, for example, or even a traditional animal-based agriculture where you're simply raising an animal to sell at some defined point in the future. That's a lot simpler transaction than what a dairy farmer is doing here, maintaining an animal for the production of something else, and animals got a lifespan and a production cycle, and there's just so many moving parts. Finding the right instrument that works for dairy has been extremely difficult, and this seems to have finally clicked. Okay, so what's it do? DMC guarantees a desired margin between a particular all milk price that they establish and an average feed cost. And again, those are two numbers that come down from USDA essentially by a calculation that they control and they've established. But then the producer purchases anything, any level of guaranteed margin that they want to realize up to $9.50. So in other words, or I should say, perhaps, yeah, I guess that's an accurate way to put it. So if the margin between these two numbers goes below $9.50, then $9.50, then potentially payments will be made depending on what coverage was purchased by what producers. So now again, and we'll get into the details in a second. FSA administers the program, of course, not the risk management RMA. I think I have RMS in here by mistake. There's a DMC homepage on the FSA website here that I have a link to. Many things here that I have links to for your benefit, so get yourself a copy of the PowerPoint. Was first authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, and private academic institutions had a lot to do with drafting, and those who work for those institutions had a lot to do with putting together this program, drafting the way it works, and I know the Farm Bureau was also involved. But 2018 Farm Bill was when it was essentially adopted by USDA as a program to be utilized, and the annual enrollment every year is basically runs to January 31st, and then see a typo in my PowerPoint here, and it covers up to the first 5 million pounds of production of the individual applicant or the producer, and there are a couple other nice resources here. There's a DMC fact sheet from 2022. There's also a supplemental DMC fact sheet from 2023. I'll explain what the supplemental DMC is in a minute. And there's also the great thing about some of these risk management instruments, so to speak, or programs, is that if you can find the handbook for that, that's the internal booklet, or usually they're fairly lengthy, that is for internal employee and staff use at USDA, in this case FSA. And those things are the gold mine. They are the place where you're going to find all of the definitive statements of how USDA is running this program. So, the other things that they put up on their website are all well and good, but if you really want to know how to understand a crop insurance policy, if it's traditional crop insurance or the DC program, or some type of interpretive issue in there, you got to find the handbooks that are out there, and they're there. They're just harder to find, and they exist for for every crop insurance product, so to speak, that USDA offers. So that's what you really want to find if you need to get to the bottom of something, particularly like, for example, you're representing a client that's got a crop insurance claim. Find the handbook for that product that you're dealing with. That's where you're going to find all the good stuff. Now, okay, so there's two levels of DMC. Producers are eligible for what's called the catastrophic level, which is based on at least a $4 margin, and it covers 95% of the historical production that producer can prove, essentially. So it's 95% up to 5 million pounds annually, I should say. And that is simply obtained, this catastrophic level of $4 a hundredweight margin is simply by paying an annual administrative fee to be in the program. You have that sort of CAT coverage, the catastrophic coverage. Now, if you want to buy more, up to the $9.50 guarantee, for those bad times when it's down in those low areas, you can purchase that on any percentage of your production from 5% up to the 95% that the CAT coverage applies to. And there's an actual annual premium, not just this administrative fee. And then again, it covers production up to 5 million pounds annually. That's probably one of the limitations. I don't know how many cows, how large a herd you have to be in that ballpark, but somebody on this call, probably knows, and you can put that in the chat and you help us all out. Now, there was, as the program started in 2019, eventually in 2021, there became a need or a noticeable improvement that could be made in the program. And essentially what that was concerning is that, for whatever reason, the production history that your ability to participate in the program was based on, in other words, that was used as the base for how much you're going to receive, was based on really old production numbers. 2011 through 2013 production numbers was actually what it was based upon. And so in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, the production history information was updated so that you could use your 2019, as recent as your 2019 production numbers. So if you, in other words, had a lot of growth between the early part of the 2010s and then 2019, you were now getting the benefit of your growth. And some people started out at a real disadvantage if they had gone through significant growth in that period of time. They were losing out because their production history didn't look as good. Now the production history is available, you can use your 2019 numbers for your production history, and is going to pay, but it's going to pay on past history of more for previous 2020. And 2022. So essentially, it's going to be a lump some payment to producers suffered previously by having been sort of hamstrung by having to use old production history amount of benefit that that 95% production history coverage for the cat coverage could have been very low in comparison to what their production history might have been in 2019, let's say. So that was sort of a makeup on something that needed to be corrected from the previous or the initial version of the plan or of the program, and that was done. Keep in mind that with as with many USDA programs now, where there's a cash benefit paid, there are various limitations. One, of course, the adjusted gross income, the AGI limitation, and it's different for different financial benefit programs. The adjusted gross limitations do not apply to DMC coverage. And there is no maximum limitation also, which also comes into play many times in certain financial benefit programs that USDA administers, and that's generally under sort of the Title I commodity type programs. Okay. Now, there's a link here at the bottom for a really, really nice USDA database on the DMC, which gives you historical enrollment and payments that have been made all totaled up. It's a great database. You can do it by states. You can run Pennsylvania. Here's Pennsylvania's number, 96 million and change in total DMC payments since the program initiated in 2019. $54,000 per average per operation. That's some serious money. 1,771 enrolled operations from Pennsylvania, and that's about a 71.8% enrollment rate, which is, and again, those who know the exact number of dairy farms we have now, maybe the numbers come out slightly different. That's USDA numbers. The bottom line is that's a pretty average across the country enrollment rate. That's when you look at a risk management product like this, and you'd say 72% of just about of all people eligible are enrolled in this. That's really good. I mean, for any product, you get a 72% opening rate on your emails, you're doing good. So this shows you how popular the program is and what a success it has been. Just to reiterate a little bit of that, hopefully you can see some of these. I'm going to show you some of the numbers that have gone on since this program started very quickly. These slides go by year, and this is 2019. Over here in the far right-hand column, if you can see those little numbers, if it's under 950, that means there was no payment that month because, excuse me, if it's over, did I say over? Yeah. If it's over 950, that means that there was no payment that month. There was no eligibility for DMC in that particular month. The USDA declared that month there would be no DMC payments. So you can see here how the first year went. And towards the end of the first year, things were going well enough that there, in fact, were not payments from August till the end of the year in the very first year. 73% enrolled, so it kicked off with a bang. But because of the fact that payments weren't made for a big chunk of the year, about 451 million was the total payments nationwide, and then you see that the total number of operations and the on average was about 19,000. Because again, it was not a program that kicked in all that often in 2019. 2020. Look what happens. It falls to 45%. That's because at the end of 2019, a lot of people said, "What am I paying for this for?" Look, there's been no payments for months. Well, people learned their lesson pretty quickly because it jumped all over the place in 2020. Again, payments were way down because enrollment was way down. And so we go forward. Now we start to get enrollment creeping back up again because people learned their lesson. And then you look at 2021 and, look at this. There is not a month 1 month, December, that even, that got 3 cents over the threshold. So every other month in 2021 had a payment. So that's why you get up into the $1 billion area here. $1.1 billion in total payments made in that year. year. So that's the increased enrollment plus the increase in the actual threshold being met. And then you get 2022, and you know enrollment's still high because people learned their lesson and what this was worth to them. You see total payments a little bit down because there were some good months in 2022. So about 83 million, because look at those beginning months of the year, things were looking great. And I guess there were only only 2 months in the year in 2022 where a DMC payment was activated, so to speak. And then here's 2023 so far. We've been on this run where it's been solid the entire year, and these are just pretty abysmal numbers, obviously. And so we're already at the $1.2 billion stage this year. Enrollment remains high. I mean, now you can see the lessons of this program. And enrollment probably never going to again like it did in that second year. That was not a wise idea to forego the DMC, even just the catastrophic coverage. Okay. So that's a little bit of history of the program. Let's talk about some of the two other programs that are kind of, I don't know, themselves out, but they're less popular now. It's dairy revenue protection. Protection against a decline in revenue, and you can measure by your yield or by the actual commodity price. Protection is more traditional administered by the risk management agency. I apologize for that here. And particularly those folks, if you ever have to get to the bottom of one of these things and you have a mess on your hands with a client. Now, dairy revenue protection is to ensure either relative to and the amount of coverage reduction elected in terms of revenue or price only covers what's called natural market prices. So there's little room where I don't know how much litigation or other disputes there may have been over those issues. It also does not cause or cover loss and death of cattle. In other words, if your revenue or your production's down due to I shouldn't say your production, your revenue is down due to natural disaster, freezing, loss of cattle due to cold temperatures, loss of cattle due to flooding, disease, etc. Those are not covered under the Dairy Revenue Protection Program. And then this last bullet sort of talks about the two types of ways that you can go with a component pricing way of determining what your price per hundredweight might be, or you can go with just a straight class pricing of taking like the class 3 and class 4 price in an equation that's so what you're selling your milk for, which type of classing you might want. More in the traditional ballpark is LGM dairy. And that's livestock gross margin coverage was something that existed from livestock. It was, essentially a way to insure, for example, beef cattle. And you're trying to lock yourself in at a certain amount of revenue. I presume in the beef cattle situation, it was per pound. But then and some time ago, and I don't know exactly what years it was, people said, well, why can't we just do the same thing, livestock gross margin for dairy, and it's sort of on a sort of a cow by cow basis. In other words, okay, we're not talking about measuring your revenue from selling the animal, we're talking about measuring your revenue from selling what the animal produces, but similar principles. And so it's a feed versus or it's a very it's a gross margin type of product where you're measuring the margin between your feed costs and what you ultimately realize. So you see the little explanation down there. It uses futures prices for various feeds, and then for milk to determine an expected gross margin and an actual gross margin. And then, so it's like, as they describe it on the USDA website, it's, it's similar to buying like a call option. On you. And you're buying, a put type of option to sell your product at a certain price. So it's a very traditional type of way to do risk management. The DMC instrument has become more popular, and I think it's better understood and provides less heartburn, I think, to dairy farmers than this kind of a model. And I think that's why this is not nearly as popular. And who knows, these last two, dairy revenue protection and the livestock gross margin, might be discontinued at some point in the future. I'm sure there are those who would say, nope, I believe in 100% my about a lot of the one think okay. First one is these come from all different directions and all different reasons, and these have various niches that they fill. Dairy Indemnity Payment Program, DIP, D-I-P-P, you'll see the acronym, is basically a payment to dairy producers when some type of public regulatory agency has direct at the raw milk before before it gets even to the plant, is excluded from the commercial market due to some type of, is the one people talk about many times, nuclear radiation, toxic substances and chemical residues. It does not pay for, I think that's correct. I hope I'm not putting my foot in my mouth on that one. It does not pay for antibiotic. And then there's also a small part of the program that allows manufacturers to also seek indemnity, but they're limited to pesticide contamination. And mostly it's because all of those should be caught before they ever get to the plant. And of course, there, at that point, the truck obviously picks up and may commingle milk, which will contaminate others who weren't the source. But then when it gets to the plant, and it's all commingled in silos and whatever else storage facilities are there, then you're talking about mass contaminations by commingling milk. And that's probably a liability that this program can't afford. But in any event, again, this is one of these FSA administered. Most of these ad hoc ones are. Now the interesting thing about this program, why it's even worth mentioning, and there's a handbook here linked there. That's your Bible if you need to find out anything about the program. PFAS has become a hot issue in the dairy indemnity payment program, and Maine and New Mexico actually are. They're at a state, or I should say, the dairy indemnity payment program, as it's administered by the FSA offices in Maine and New Mexico, PFAS is fully included. It is not in other states yet, and I believe my guess, because I don't know the actual conditions on the ground in Maine or New Mexico as to why that happened first there. I believe it's because they had particular PFAS issues in particular locations that led to this being a matter of state intervention and of milk from markets in Maine and New Mexico, which led to this being urgent. I would expect this to be a very hot issue as we go forward. So this program is going to become much more front and center as we go forward with PFAS. So if you have clients or anyone who is starting to brush up against those issues, this is one other part of the PFAS mess to be aware of. Okay, now another program that exists is this dairy donation program. Now, there is another thing called Milk Donation Reimbursement Program, which you'll see down in the third bullet. That's an old program that exists and was not related to the COVID pandemic, was simply an existing program mostly used by dairy processors to essentially defray certain costs for dairy products that were going to be donated to the charitable food system. But the dairy donation program was a big lump sum of money during the pandemic, was in the 2021 Consolidated Appropriations Act of $400 million to try to facilitate dairy donations and also under an assumption that perhaps supply chain problems might lead to the need to make more donations of product, or just that maybe the charitable food system is able to accept more because it's moving more quickly. Many reasons related to the pandemic why this came up as a use for $400 million in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So the bottom line is this program, however, has expired as of September 2023. So it is now off the table, but just be aware that the Milk Donation Reimbursement Program is a thing that still does exist. And it's essentially defraying costs, including for the products themselves, as well as other things like transportation, storage, et cetera, like things of that nature. Now, the Market Volatility Assistance Program, what's that? That's the pandemic-related program that total of $350 million in two different rounds. Round one was $250 million, and then round two was like approximately another $100 million. That was paid out due to this big mess that most of us know about, which was related to, during the pandemic, a 2018 Class 1 price calculation change, or that was made in the 2018 Farm Bill, produced these upside down producer price differentials, where it ended up that the cheese price was high. The Class 3 cheese price was higher than the Class 1 fluid milk price, and then that turned everything upside down. And also, the government was buying cheese for various programs like the Farm to Family Food Box Program, I think is the right title for it. And so cheese became in much higher demand. So the bottom line is, this was this problem. This is why we have the Federal Milk Marketing Order hearings going on right now in the state of Indiana, because of all of the negativity that arose mostly due to this 2018 Farm Bill Class 1 price calculation change. So the bottom line is, this program was not USDA giving the money directly to producers. USDA gave the money to either dealers, handlers, or cooperatives to distribute downward to their members and to their suppliers essentially in the same manner that they would be paid for their milk, they were now getting a supplemental payment for that milk, and it was for milk that was delivered between July and December of 2020. So this is the classic gigantic ad hoc payment. Now, the industry will tell you that this mess probably lost, the dairy industry probably lost, close to 800 million or 900 million or some number of that ballpark through this problem. But this is as much as the federal government was able to appropriate to try to make good on that particular problem. Now, there are limitations here. There is a adjusted gross income limitation, and there's also a 75% of your income has to be derived from farming, ranching, or forestry related activities. So the actually engaged in farming limitation here comes into play with regard to the market assistance program. We've talked about that many times here before. Okay, almost done. We got the Organic Dairy Marketing Assistance Program. Chloe talked about that, and because this is a very recent development. So it's about 104 million for a one-time 2023 cost share payment to organic producers for projected marketing costs based upon their marketing cost and the pounds of milk that they marketed, organic milk that they marketed in 2022. And this idea, and this is based upon, as you see, I quoted a little language here. Organic dairy producers facing a unique set of challenges in recent years, including higher costs attributable to the pandemic and drought conditions, and feed, organic feed certainly impacted in a big way by drought conditions. And so it was an attempt to stimulate the organic industry and give them a sort of a life raft here through 1 year, a particularly difficult year with at least the pandemic wrapping up and drought conditions in 2022. Here's some links that tell the story a little bit better about that particular program. Last one is the milk loss coverage, the milk loss program. Chloe also talked about this at the beginning. This is essentially a program that is, it's like a disaster, response program, again, dealing with floods, disasters, extreme cold weather that we've had, extreme hot weather that we've had, all of the, climactic related disasters that we've had over the last several years. This is a sort of cash infusion for a special program for that over and above many of the other programs that already exist. And this is just for dairy. And this is receiving payments for milk that was dumped or removed from the market without compensation. And this could be, you didn't get a truck into your farm for, 3 weeks because bridges were out, or, all the things that you could imagine from various types of natural disasters. So here's some links regarding that particular program. And here's some more explanation of how that program works. It does have a payment limitation, but not the adjusted gross income limitation. And it just basically gives you the, Chloe told you a bit about that. So with that, Audrey, do we have questions?
No, I'm not seeing
any
here. So
does anybody want to?
You can put it in the Q&A.
I was going to say, if anybody wants to slide a question in there right now, that would be great.
We actually have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I usually don't. I saw we were getting close, and I wanted to actually leave time for questions, which is very unusual for me. Let me stop my sharing and see if we have anything else. Audrey, what's our next topic for the next and for our next Dairy Quarterly?
I don't think that we have that.
Okay.
So stay tuned on our events page, and we'll have emails out and that kind of stuff. But our next event for the center is, well, here, let me,
if anyone has, by the way, while she's looking that up, if anyone has topics that they would like to cover, this is kind of my baby, and I do this And every once in a while I struggle for topics to, we've talked about a lot of different things. Interestingly, how the topics of today coalesced with the happenings of today. Very unusual that happened that way. But hopefully you got a little bit better understanding of some of these programs, because they're literally, particularly coming out of the pandemic, there is just so many ad hoc programs that you kind of lose sight of what's going on and where they are in the grand scheme of things. But keep in mind, really the ones you need to know about are, the DMC program is the king. It is working and it is popular and it is widely used. The Dairy Revenue Protection, the DRP program, is sort of on its way out or less popular. And the Livestock Gross Margin program for dairy, again, less popular. I'm sure there are adherents of both of those other two programs who want to stick with them. But the dairy margin, the DMC, dairy margin coverage program, has really struck the right nerve with the dairy industry. I think a lot of it because it's easy to understand, it's easy to use. When you're going to get payments, or when you're going to get payments, if you're going to get payments, and it's fairly regularly. Since it's done on a monthly basis. I see. Okay, so Audrey, you're sharing what we have coming up, right?
Yep. So thanks so much, Brooke. I guess that is the end of our program for today. So we've got lots of different programs, not necessarily dairy coming up, but we'll have dairy events posted on our webpage soon. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll hope to see you next time.